being here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Hi, everyone. Thank you for showing up, even though I'm sure you're all very much done with the school year. Um, Especially this group of people. I feel like it's extra hectic at the end. So I am going to share my screen and we'll jump right in. I'll do my best to monitor comments, but feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions as we go. So I think these things are always best if we're able to um, make it more of a conversation. All right, what do we think? Allison, can you give me guidance on whether or not this is showing the right thing?
So right now we can see your slides with the bar on the side,
Okay, let's see
not
if we
like the
swap
full.
it. And for the Baumgartner. Is that better, Allison?
That's perfect. You're
Okay,
good.
awesome. That's great. Okay, so we already know what I'm going to be talking about today, and you know a little bit about me. But over at Pediatric Behavioral Health and Wellness, we have a bunch of services for those with autism and those that are more broadly neurodivergent. We do assessments. Um, we have treatment programs that are evidence-based, both in group format and individual. And I kind of oversee those. And then we do a lot of training, supervision, and consultation, and then some research. And I also just wanted to share that I'm a mom, so I kind of get this from the mom perspective a bit. I have Leo here enjoying mint tingling, a boy after my own heart. He's 5.5, and then my little peanut here is Vivian, and she's 2.5. So I want us to first talk about neurodivergence, think a little bit about the strengths that come with neurodivergence and the challenges. See if we can do our best to shift from thinking about behaviors that are outwardly and obviously observable and turn more toward brain and body-based needs that underlie those behaviors. And then I want us to talk about practical support strategies. I know that's why you're all here. And then if we have time, definitely a group discussion on real student examples or talking about barriers to doing all of these wonderful things. Okay, so just a basic overview of neurodivergence. It's the idea that there's a natural variation in human brains and that this is not inherently a deficit or a problem. So today we're going to strike a balance of celebrating the beauty of these different minds and then also recognizing that with these variations, we sometimes can get some really notable challenges, both for the student and then the school team. And that's especially the case when resources are limited, which is almost always the case, which is really hard. And I know it's hard for all of you. But given that about 20% of students are neurodivergent, and I'm guessing it's even higher than this, I'm just really glad this group is here and interested to learn more. So here are some diagnoses that fit into that neurodivergent umbrella. Some of these may click right away and say, yeah, that's absolutely something I'd consider to be neurodivergent, and some of them maybe not so much. And there are more than this. You can find a list of 20, and certain infographics and all of that, but these are some of the main ones that I come across. And this always anchors me a bit, and it might seem a little bit silly, but I will often talk to families or patients themselves, and feel free to steal this example or analogy. And I'll talk about how, it's really nothing to do with the brain itself being a problem, but it has to do with that beautiful different brain or how their body responds and the environment that that brain and body is expected to be in. And I think about my dog, Watson. So these are both Watson, right? And if you met Watson after being, dragging him to Home Depot because we wanted him to just go everywhere with us when he was our only baby, or at, Park Avenue, hiding under a table, you would see a certain version of Watson, maybe similar to the version of some kids you see every day at school, where it's a really tough fit. He's overwhelmed by all the people, Maybe there's a lot of car noise, or maybe there's, equipment noise at a Home Depot, all of that. And I think it'd be easy to think of one dimension of who Watson is. But then if you went off leash hiking with us at our favorite park, Awatka, oh my gosh, you would see a completely different version of him. He confident, running, listening beautifully, just having the very best time. And it's still the same exact dog, but it's the dog relative to the environment. That's really, really important. And then I pulled in this quote from Temple Grandin, who I'm sure many know has autism, and said, "I don't suffer from autism, but I do suffer from the way I am treated." So the autism or the neurodivergence isn't the issue. It's the fact that neurodivergent folks are expected to live in a world that was created for neurotypical people. So now I want you to just take a minute and think about one of your neurodivergent students, like whoever comes to mind first, and then think about the classroom, a typical classroom at your school, the cafeteria, I don't know, the gym, hallways, and think about where you've noticed that mismatch. What makes the school environment or expectations hard for that particular student? And then we can think about, what does hard look like? It could be more like outward signs of aggression. It could be more of like a dissociation or kind of paying attention to what's in that child's mind because that's a more interesting or safer space for them. Could be interpersonal challenges. It could be a kid that is doing, appearing from the outside to be an ideal student. Not a problem at all. Could be showing up late, maybe because of executive functioning challenges. Can look like a lot. So across a few slides here, I just want to go into some specific areas that may underlie the why of why schools are hard. The first thing that always comes to mind for me, partly because my research background is in sensory processing differences, is sensory demands. Gosh, I mean, it's rough. It can be really rough at schools. Loud, lots of noise, lots of overlapping noise streams coming in. Crowding, so the unpredictable social crowding, fluorescent lights, the temperature. I don't know how many of your schools have air conditioning at this point, but man, I remember this time when I was in school and it was like dangerously hot in some of the schools. They might be tired because so many school start times are not ideal for kids or adolescents' natural rhythms. Um, and just the general expectation, whether it's explicit or more implicit, to inhibit natural coping, like sensory-based coping. So here's a quote from someone online with the handle Autistic Since Forever. "I tend to withdraw when overwhelmed, not physically, I just stop interacting. I can still see or hear everything going on around me, but none of it sticks." And the analogy I always use with families, and I'll share with you today, is imagine going through your whole day today with a pair of pants on that's 1 to 2 sizes too small. Okay. Um, I don't know about you, but I would definitely be snippier. I would have a way lower threshold for giving up. Might not want to talk to people. Definitely more reactive because, at least half of your brain and regulation powers are going to the, like, just get through it. Like, I'm trying to ignore the feeling of these pants on my body. Now imagine that's only one sensory input that you're trying to regulate amongst multiple that are not a good fit with your system. And we have executive functioning demands, right? Gosh, depending on what year the kiddo is in, there's going to be varying levels of expectation around organization, transitioning multiple times a day, following multi-step directions, time management, being able to start something and switch to something else, maybe falling into this difficulty of what's sometimes called neurodivergent inertia, that difficulty getting started. Lots of distractions. So executive dysfunction is a very common feature of neurodivergence. And here's a quote that I thought was helpful. It can sometimes be quite complicated to focus on more than one thing at a time. I suppose it's in the same way that a computer can't handle multitasking. I would prefer to process and solve a problem one at a time rather than using strategies that other neurotypical people would use to solve problems. So, in that sense, I guess multitasking I'm not necessarily good at because if I have to do more than one thing at once, that can sometimes be quite stressful. Social demands, so lots of bullying, complex and hidden social rules. Some classrooms make it a requirement to do a lot of group work, and of course, the social sensory input. And 75% or more of neurodivergent students are bullied. So that's definitely something to look out for. And then emotional demands. Some of your students, our patients, really struggle with perfectionism, having a fear of mistakes. Sometimes it's inherent to their diagnosis that really kind of particular or rigid expectations for themselves or expectations for how others are supposed to behave, really needing everyone to follow the rules just so. Focusing on the negative and frequent corrections, right? These kids hear so many more corrections than they do praise typically. And it can be really hard for adults around them to keep it at the forefront of their mind to praise the good, even if that good is really small in comparison to the challenges. Just exhaustion from regulating all day and living inauthentically. So for those that are seeming to do a great job and to appear very neurotypical, that can have even larger mental health implications because the rule they're basically following is I can't be myself. In order for people to be happy with me, I have to show up as someone that is not who I actually am. Not a great recipe for self-esteem. So how do we help? Right? We've got these difficulties, and let's think about what we can do to ameliorate some of them. So I think a big one is just understanding their neurodivergence and how it interacts with the environment and the different approaches that are being taken. As much as possible, being able to learn from them. This is a very diverse group of students we're talking about here. So I'm sharing some themes, but of course, if you can make a student feel comfortable to share their personal experience, that's wonderful. Validate, see what you can do to better understand the behavior, look beneath the surface, help them to communicate more adaptively, emphasize strengths, really think about the nervous system as a guide to when teaching and using coping strategies may be most helpful and when they're maybe beyond the ability to learn something new in a given moment. Create and formalize supports. And then, oh gosh, my dream is just that there would be a really neurodiversity affirming culture at all of your schools. And I'm sure many of you have worked to create that, and it's just hard. So if we go into each of these categories and we think about the sensory piece, right? So the yellow we already talked about, and now what do we do about that? I always encourage people to think about sensory processing as a tool. So yes, there are a lot of sensory inputs that can be seen as or felt as aversive, and the kid wants nothing to do with them. But there's going to be just as many sensory inputs that can be used as a regulation strategy. And it's tough because it's so different for each kid. But again, if you're able to build that relationship to hear from them what is helpful or help them brainstorm and try things out, that's great. Like anything else, that's going to work best if you're able to, introduce a sensory strategy as things are escalating, not when they're at the tippy top of dysregulation. Things that may help, increasing using like wobble cushions for that vestibular support and getting out some of that extra energy, encouraging safe stimming, even having a stimming menu of different things that a child could try. Fidgets, compression vests, movement breaks, all of those things. thinking about how can we decrease certain inputs, like noise filtering options, like loops or dimmable lights, or they have the fluorescent light covers right on Amazon that can help filter out some of that awful light. Thinking about reduced visual chaos. Like, I think some classrooms are so beautifully decorated and there's so much going on. And to some kids, that feels homey and welcoming. And to other kids, that's going to feel like a lot. Sometimes minimalism might be the better approach. And then reducing extra scents. Because I love my perfume and I love my lotion. And sometimes I get frustrated. I have to have the unscented lotion in my office, but I do think it's really helpful for a lot of my patients. I enjoy using this double axis system to when I'm working with an individual kid to help them plot out both their body's response on this vertical axis in terms of their nervous system, and then their behavioral response on this horizontal axis. So you can see that certain sensory inputs, like a fire alarm, their body may overreact relative to other kids' bodies and they want to avoid that input. Bubbles, for example, they may have a huge excited reaction and want to seek it out. It's not something they're trying to avoid. Maybe body squeezing would be put down here. Maybe they're generally underreactive to physical touch input, especially that like firmer pressure. Um, and they really like it. Oral input for those kids that kind of need a lot of that mouthing, right? So crunchy pretzels, the different chewable necklaces, even the kids that are chewing on pens. Movement could be here. Input, like maybe bathroom signals. We don't really have a clear behavioral place to plot this, but we do know that the signals to that kid that they need to go to the bathroom are really a lot lower than they would be in most kids. And this could provide a visual for them. Same thing with body position. Maybe they don't quite have that core strength or understand where their body is in space. And so they're the one like falling out of the chair a lot and may get in trouble for that. But then if we anchor it back to the sensory system, we could realize, oh, wow, that's more of like a skill deficit than it is a behavioral choice. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Executive functioning demands and then the supports that could help with them, right? So we know that the prefrontal cortex, which is where the executive functioning system lives, is underdeveloped in all kids, right, till their mid-20s, but definitely neurodivergent kids. And it's really important to understand that
Oh, God, I don't even know how to stop.
there's a bidirectional relationship between like the limbic system where the emotions are and the EF system. And so, like for any of us, when we're really emotional, that EF system is further suppressed. It's not working as great as it should. And when our EF system is delayed because we're neurodivergent, we're going to have a harder time putting the brakes on the emotional response. And so a lot of kids will have a double whammy. They'll have anxiety or a mood dysregulation disorder, and then they'll also have executive dysfunction. And so it's like, oh man, from both ends of this relationship, it's really, really challenging to regulate once they get emotional. Then we can think about working memory supports, inhibitory control supports, cognitive flexibility supports. Those are generally considered the three big areas. I'm not going to go through every single one of these. I think probably most of you are familiar with a lot of EF accommodations, but I will share these slides and feel free to peek at them later. I will make a little note here that rote memory is not the same as working memory. And so many of like our autistic kids have incredible rote memory, especially for special interest. It's like, oh my gosh, how can this kid remember every single Star Wars character that's ever been introduced? And yet they can't remember to bring their homework back from home into school. And it's like, well, that's very different. The craziness of getting out the door and having to keep track of many things in your mind is a totally different system than long-term memory. One intervention I wanted to spotlight, I'm not sure how familiar all of you are on Unstuck and on Target, but it's a really nice evidence-based program out of like Children's National, and it looks like UConn as well, that targets executive functioning in a broad range of kids, definitely ADHD, definitely autism. And it works on flexibility mostly, but also looks or helps emotion regulation, planning, and organization. Big age range. And I think they're always looking to extend the age range. So stay tuned to see where that goes. But fit some requirements for accommodation plans. It is created where there's materials for home, clinic, and school. So I really like the fact that it can generalize across settings. And there's some nice like CE credits available for teachers. We also offer at our clinic an Unstuck and on Target group, and it's been really well received by families. Then we have social demands. I think that neuroaffirming climate that we're striving for is going to help a lot to help kids as they're growing up to appreciate differences. I think principles of universal design can be so great, showing children that, wow, if this is designed in a certain way that benefits all of us and we can all use the same kind of ramp to enter the school and it's not just for those special kids over there, then there's more appreciation for the fact that like we're all in this together, even if we're different in some ways. Helping to model perspective taking is a great way to build up that skill. Using direct, literal language. So a lot of neurodivergent folks can come off as blunt or even rude because of their language style. And they have a really hard time understanding when people use a lot of analogies or metaphors when speaking. And so recognizing that this is just a different way of communicating, not a skill deficit, is helpful. I think it can help us take things less personally and adjust our own language. Course structured teaching of social skills can be helpful. Giving options on how much social interaction is required to meet academic demands or requirements. Having spots where the sensory input and executive functioning demands are quite small, so that way the social growth and social experiences can be more positive, I think are helpful. So if we're expecting a kid to build social skills in the lunchroom, good luck doing that because their brain is just trying to survive that. Peer partnerships. And then one thing I'll really note is be very aware of how and when you may be encouraging masking, which again is that idea that we're teaching skills, or it feels like we're teaching skills that may be reinforcing the idea that their way is not good and being more neurotypical is good. I always try to think about what is that individual's goals, and then how can we work to build skills toward those goals rather than simply saying, oh, these are all the things that make you look autistic. Let's try to reduce all of those symptoms. This is another analogy I use a lot with families. Just thinking about what maybe that masking experience is like for these people. Imagine you're in a day-long interview, right? And the entire time you are hyper aware of how you are appearing to others. So half your brain is saying like, oh, gotta make eye contact. All right, do I look interested? Yeah, great. Oh, that's so cool, right? And so you're really putting it on. You're questioning, did I have the right response to that? You're wondering, like, do they like me? Am I doing this right? Maybe the outfit you're dressed in doesn't feel good on your body. Um, and then, I don't know about you, at the end of the day, that's kind of how I feel. And that's where we get like the restraint collapse when kids are going home and day in and day out. That's just not going to be great for anything, but especially mental health. There's some nice adaptations that are neuroaffirming of the peers program, which I'm sure you've all heard about or have in your schools. It really changes it from teaching social skills to deconstructing social interactions and then helping the individual realize like when they might want to do that and when, it might be best to just be more authentic in that moment because the goal might be to reduce bullying. And in that And that way, we might have to think about what's more stigmatizing, but for other kids, that might not be a goal. All right. And then just wanted to let you know we're over at PBHW, we're developing a reducing neurodivergent masking program that we're going to roll out in individual therapy and group. And so that's going to help adolescents identify and address masking and think about its role in mental health challenges. Okay. And then we have the emotional demands. I find it helpful to model imperfection, use that most generous interpretation, the idea that if they could do it, they would, and catch them being good. I like the penny trick of starting the day with 10 pennies in one pocket, and every time you catch them being good, a particular student, you move one over to the other side with the goal that, okay, I have to move all 10 pennies. It's a nice reminder. And then, of course, the idea that things may look fine at school for a lot of these neurodivergent kids, but if you're hearing from parents that it's an absolute nightmare at home, try not to just wonder if that's a problem at home and see if we can maybe let some of that pressure kind of out of the pressure cooker for that child while they're at school. Think if there could be breaks or sensory strategies or checking in with someone during the day so they don't have to hold it all in and then collapse at home. There's some great adaptations to our, tried and true evidence-based strategies for emotion, right? For CBT or DBT that fit the neurodivergent population. There's a great program called Spirit IDA that's out of Drexel. That's a good one. And then I have this book, so let me know if you need me to like share the link to it or a particular page, but it's an awesome workbook adapting every component of DBT. I find it really user friendly. Okay, and then I just wanted to note that, of course, there are barriers. I am sure many of you are like nodding along or saying like, yep, no, we try to do that, but there's real limitations to your ability to enact some of these suggestions. I'm sure there's infrastructure difficulties, resources both in your time, real money, teachers' time, continuing education and loving, really wishing you could maybe learn one of these programs or purchase some of these materials and just not having the access to it. And then just different strategies to teaching that might be helpful but aren't part of the curriculum or approved or whatnot recognized by the school. So I just wanted to acknowledge that um, and offer up some of these discussion questions, whether it's here or maybe taking it back to your school, but thinking about what your school is already doing a great job at for your neurodivergent students, maybe a couple of changes you think would benefit all students and staff, some of the barriers and ways you've in particular adapted your work or home life to fit your neurotype, because it's always good to kind of reflect on the fact that as adults, we have so much more control over our experience. And sometimes we forget that we also are different in our own ways. And it's so nice that we have the flexibility to make things fit a little bit better. So I'll end there for now and see if anyone has any questions or things that they wanted to talk a little bit more about.
I think, Jessica, if you could share the links to some of those resources, we will send them out in our